Flashing neon lights cast eerie shadows as the jailer entered the cell. "That's it, Reed. It's time." His voice sounded almost robotic. Reed Harrison slowly raised his head. He wore heavy shackles on his wrists, and his face was etched with the deep wrinkles of 5 years on death row. But there was no fear in his eyes, only unshakable determination. "I have one last wish," he whispered. "I want to see my dog, Stormy." The warden hesitated. "A deal is a deal. Prisoners often ask for a special meal or to see their family. But what about dogs?" "I'll ask," he whispered, and then walked out, leaving Reed alone with his thoughts. Reed closed his eyes. His mind was filled with the image of Storm, his faithful German shepherd, the only friend who remained with him after his capture. He remembers the night he rescued a puppy from a shelter and how the dog pulled him out of one of the darkest times in his life. "Just this once," he whispered. "I just want to see him more." 15 miles away in a country villa, the phone rang. Tess Vale, a young veterinarian with tired eyes and wild red hair, picked up the phone. "Yes, Miss Weir. This is Warden Coleman. This is Reed Harrison. He made his last wish, which is related to the dog you take care of." Tess was stunned. My heart began to pound in my chest. "Storm? Does he want to see Storm?" "Yes. He wants to see him first." Coleman cleared his throat. "Before it's all over." Tess pursed her lips. She was convinced that Reed was innocent. Over the years, she received dozens of letters from him, and read his unwavering belief that one day the truth would be revealed. She believed him. "But there is no time now. I'll bring him, give me an hour." But when the woman called the dog, there was no response. The front door was locked, but the window to the balcony was slightly ajar. A torn belt lay on the floor. Tess panicked. The Storm disappeared. With trembling hands, she dialed a number she hadn't dialed for a long time. "Ryan, I need your help. This is about Reed and Storm." There was a pause on the other end. Then a deep voice answered, "I'm gone." Time passed quickly. Tess searched the whole house, checking closets and under furniture. The Storm seemed to disappear. She ran out onto the porch and peered into the darkness of the garden. The cool night breeze carried the sound of dogs barking in the distance. But was it the Storm? As she was about to get into the car, a black Dodge Charger stopped in front of the house, and the brakes made a screeching sound. A tall man with a scar on his face got out of the car. Those scars seemed to hold stories he had never shared. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes sharp like a predator's. "The storm is over," sighed Tess. The window to the balcony was open and the strap was broken. "Someone took it, Ryan. And Reed doesn't have time. No time at all." Ryan cursed under his breath and took out his cell phone. "Vince, we have a problem. A dog has been kidnapped. Not just any dog, Reed's dog. Find out who's behind it." As Ryan spoke, Tess thought back to last night. Suddenly she remembered a black car that drove slowly past her house several times. "I saw that car yesterday," she muttered. A dark sedan drove past the house 2 or 3 times. "I thought it was my hallucination, but now." Ryan nodded. "Then we have a place to start. Take a seat." Meanwhile, somewhere in an industrial part of the city, Storm was pulling at the chain on his collar. The dog growled quietly, his ears twitching at each sound. The warehouse was dark, with only a faint glow from a flickering light on the ceiling. A man in a gray suit leaned against the box, looking at him with a smug smile on his face. "Nice dog," he said, puffing on his cigarette. Unfortunately, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another thin man with cold eyes walked out from the shadows. "The order is only to isolate him. Don't hurt him for now." The man in the suit shrugged. It all depends on what our friend Reed does next. Storm roared furiously, trying to break free. Somehow he knew Reed needed him. He will fight to the last moment and return to his master. Meanwhile, Reed sat on his bunk in the prison, watching the narrow beam of light falling through the barred window. In a few hours, it should all be over. The cell door opened. The warden came in, followed by the prison director. "We have a problem," the chief said with a serious face. "The dog is missing. Someone stole it just before it was supposed to be brought here." Reed held his breath. "What? Who?" "We don't know. But we're trying." Reed clenched his hands into fists. His last wish, the only thing that had kept him going for 5 years, was taken away. But who? Why? Ryan's charger darted across the empty streets and dialed another number. "We're ahead. The warehouse is at the port, and we need reinforcements." Tess turned around. She knew time was against them. If they don't find Storm, Reed will die and never see him again. The port was shrouded in a pre-dawn twilight, and thick fog spread between the abandoned warehouses. The water lapped silently against the dock walls, and seagulls screamed in the distance. Ryan parked the charger in a dark alley and pulled a pistol from under the seat. "Stay in the car." Tess's eyes flashed. "Forget it. That's my dog." Ryan looked at her for a moment, then sighed. "Then stay close. If things get out of control, run." They tiptoed to the warehouse. Ryan leaned against the wall, trying to see through the dirty glass. Shadows moved inside. 2 men, one in a suit, the other with a hood covering his face. In the middle, Storm is chained, but still ready to fight. This guy has no idea who he offended. Ryan whispered. Tess clenched her fists. "So let's show them this." Meanwhile, Reed paced back and forth in the cell. He didn't know what was happening outside, but he knew one thing: someone desperately wanted him to avoid seeing Storm. The question is why? Is this just a sadistic game? More. The warden was still standing at the door. "We're trying to get information, but I can't promise anything." Reed looked him in the eyes. "Please," he said in a hoarse voice. "I only have a little time left." The boss sighed. "We're doing the best we can." But Reed knows it's not enough. Ryan hid behind a pile of trays, counting quietly. 2 guards. Maybe more in the shadows. Tess picked up a rusty pipe from the ground. "We have no time to waste," Ryan laughed. "I like it. Your mood." With one smooth movement, he threw a stone at the metal wall. The sound echoed throughout the room, and everyone inside trembled. "What is that?" "I don't know. Check it out." The masked man pulled out a gun and walked towards the door. When he came out, Ryan grabbed him from behind, knocked the gun away, and slammed him against the wall. The unconscious man fell to the ground. "Not bad," Tess murmured, impressed. Inside, Storm barked loudly. He heard it. But the man in the suit also reacted. He pulled out his gun and pointed it at the dog. "Don't go any further, or the dog will die." Tess caught her. But Ryan just chuckled and said, "You don't know who you are dealing with." He just made a slight gesture with his hand, and before the man in the suit could react, Storm ignored the chains, roared, and pounced on the villain. Reed turned around, his heart pounding. "Follow me. Now." In an abandoned warehouse, Storm successfully broke free from her restraints. The chain was still around his neck, but that did not stop the dog. He leaped up suddenly, knocking the man in the suit to the ground. The gun went flying aside with a roar. "Storm, come back," Tess called out, but the dog paid no attention to her words. He growled, standing over the man, showing his sharp teeth. Ryan moved closer and pushed the gun away with his foot. If I were you, I wouldn't move, he said coldly. The man blinked in shock and raised his hands. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, he gasped. Ryan pulled out his gun and pointed it at the man. Then explain it to us. Tess knelt down beside Storm and stroked his back soothingly. Boy, we'll get you back to Reed. But just then they heard the screeching of tires outside. Then the door was slammed and people's voices were heard. Reinforcements, Ryan whispered. We need to get out of here now. Tess glanced at the back door. That way. Ryan grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him to his feet. You come with us. Maybe Reed would like to ask you a few questions. Sensing Tess's proximity, Storm stopped his threatening growl and followed closely behind her. Not a step behind. They walked through the warehouse, Ryan in front, Tess and the dog behind. In the background they could hear the sound of someone breaking into the building. They're gone, someone shouted. Then gunshots rang out. Reed sat in the prison van, his wrists still handcuffed. The warden sat there. I don't know what happened, he whispered, but apparently the FBI found your dog. They called me from above and ordered me to provide all possible assistance. Reed's heart began to beat faster. Where's my dog? We'll go there now, the Master Chief replied. Reed leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. He didn't know whether to be happy or scared. What if this is a trap? But he knew one thing for sure. If Storm was still alive, there was hope. With swift and confident movements, Ryan bound the prisoner's hands and pushed him into the war carriage. Tess jumped into the passenger seat and Storm climbed back in, panting. The first bullet hit her. The back of the ship as Ryan started the engine. Get down, he yelled, and at the port behind them, their port scurried forward. They were busy struggling, and they stretched out their feet again. Cars rushed through the intersection, and the traffic ahead was endless, almost blocking the traffic. Hold on, Ryan roared, swerving the steering wheel, tires squealing, and the car rushed into an alley so narrow that the rearview mirror almost touched the wall. Behind them, two SUVs collided with a dull thud and the sound of broken glass. This will definitely delay them, Lion muttered. Tess sighed, relieved, turning to Storm in the back seat. He was alert, ready, and loyal. The man in a suit they took away whispered, "Let me go." "You'll see, Reed." The man paled. "This is crazy. You don't know who you're messing with." Tess leaned toward him. "Then tell us." But the man pursed his lips. "Coward," Ryan snarled. "And then Reed will get answers from you." He stepped on the accelerator. Reed felt the car stop suddenly. Through the small barred window, he saw that they were not in the prison. "Where are we?" he asked. Coleman, who was sitting next to him, laughed again. "We have to improvise. New situation has emerged." Reed's stomach clenched. Was this a trap? The door opened. Two guards helped him out. Then he heard low, excited cries. Reed's heart began to beat faster. Suddenly a blurry figure flew towards him. A strong, furry body pressed against him, and warm, familiar breath touched his skin. Reed knelt down, feeling the wet nose on his cheek, the desperate licks, the wagging and trembling of the tail. 5 years. 5 years later. Reed was finally here, and out of the corner of his eye he saw the warden, reunited with his pet. A minute later, the warden called Ryan over and handed the agent some documents. Coleman nodded, looked at Reed meaningfully, and walked towards the van. "You have 48 hours before the case can be heard," he said to the prisoner before leaving. The guards followed their leader into the van, which disappeared around the corner. Following the van, Reed was surprised to see Tess, Ryan, and a man in a suit with his hands tied walking towards him. His eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" Tess stepped forward. "One of the people who didn't want you to see the storm." Reed stood up slowly. His eyes hardened, his shoulders tensed. "Then he'd better tell me why." They quickly tied the prisoner to the only chair in the room. Reed appeared before him, his hands clenched into fists. "Speak." The man hesitated. Then he smiled quietly. "You think you won? You have no idea what you just escaped from." Reed's eyes were still cold. "Then explain it to me." "This is not just about you," the man said. "There's more." Ryan pulled out his pistol and slowly spun the drum. "I have patience, but not infinite." The man swallowed. "You think this is just a game?" "Your dog was kidnapped for a reason, Reed. He deserves to be eliminated." Tess frowned. "Why?" The prisoner gritted his teeth and said nothing. Then Storm moved closer, baring her teeth and growling so low that the man twitched in his chair. The mortal fear in his eyes was quickly replaced by a desire to speak. "Because the dog knows something. Or rather, because it's keeping something from anyone that no one should see." Reed's stomach tightened. "Stormy," he whispered. He slowly knelt down in front of the dog. Storm tilted his head, seeming to sense what his master was looking for. Reed ran his fingers through the thick fur until he felt something hard. His hands shook as he pulled out the mysterious object. Turns out it's a tiny flash drive, safely hidden under the collar buckle. Reed's eyes flickered to the man in the suit. "What's on it?" The man grinned. "Is it true?" Reed looked at the small USB flash drive in his hand. He had spent 5 years in jail, 5 years hoping for justice, and now at least some clues were finally in his hands. Tess looked at Ryan worriedly. "We need to find out what's in there." Ryan nodded. "I know a place where you can do this safely." He then pointed the gun at the man in the suit. "But first he'll tell us more." The prisoner leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You see through me. I'm just a middleman. What you're facing is much bigger than you think." Reed's patience was exhausted. "Tell me what's on this flash drive, or you'll regret it." The prisoner cast a haunting glance at Storm's bared fangs and whispered through clenched teeth, "Bank transfers. Backroom deals. The names of people who would do anything to get you dead. You're not just innocent, Reed. You're the only thing standing in the way of those who stand to lose millions of dollars if you stay alive." Reed gritted his teeth until they crunched. He had always known this. He is just a scapegoat. "Who is behind this?" Tess asked coldly. The man was silent. Ryan pulled the trigger. "This is your last chance." There was a brief silence, then a gunshot. But Ryan was not the gunman. There was a flash of light outside the window. The man in the suit's eyes widened. Then he fell forward, dead. "Oops!" Ryan exclaimed and threw Reed and Tess to the floor. Another bullet hit the wall. "Some people want to make sure. The prisoner never says anything. We need to get out of here right now." Tess yelled. Ryan grabbed the flash drive from Reed and ran to the back door. The Storm followed silently. Behind them, its ears alert. Tires squealed outside. A black SUV pulled up. "These people are just the same as before," cried Tess. Ryan hid behind a dumpster. "Then let's get this over with." He drew his pistol and fired back. Reed and Tess ran to the Charger, and Storm jumped in the back seat. "As soon as we get out of here, we're going to make this public," Tess said. Reed started the engine. "Hold on." He stepped on the accelerator. 24 hours later, a news channel live-streamed, in a shocking turn of events, evidence from Anonymous. Flash drives reveals a conspiracy that nearly claimed the life of an innocent man and embroiled senior politicians and business leaders in an international corruption scandal. Reed Harrison, who should have been executed a day earlier, has now been fully vindicated. Reed stared at the screen in an anonymous hotel room. Ryan stood nearby, arms crossed. Tess stroked Stormy's head as the dog lay contentedly beside her. "We did it," she said quietly. Reed took a deep breath. 5 years of uncertainty, 5 years of pain. But now he has his life back. He leaned toward the storm. "You saved me, kid." Stormy Reed's eyes grew stern. "But those who planned this are still out there." Ryan smiled. "Then we have to take care of them." Reed stood up and walked confidently towards the exit, his eyes burning with a determination to finally restore justice.